I discovered the theft at 5:47 in the morning. Not because I was awake. I sleep deeply, methodically, the sleep of someone whose mind doesn't spin through problems in the dark. But because my phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I'd trained myself to notice unusual alerts. 3 notifications from my credit card company in the span of 4 minutes. Fraud detection. Pending charges. Please verify immediately. I sat up before my eyes fully opened. And by the time I reached for my glasses, my brain had already begun its familiar cataloging process. The kind of automatic analysis that made me valuable at the firm. The quiet competence that meant when people said Hannah, they said it the way you'd say dependable. I opened the banking app with thumbs still heavy from sleep. 3 charges. American Airlines. Each one flagged as large, each one made between 1:43 and 1:51 a.m. While I slept. While my phone was on my nightstand and my laptop was closed. The amounts added up to just under $12,000. The charges were already processed to the pending section, which meant they'd move to posted within hours, which meant the window for immediate reversal was closing. First-class tickets, I realized, looking at the itinerary attached to the receipt. 4 of them. Departure from Chicago O'Hare to San Juan, Puerto Rico. 2 weeks out. The dates meant departure on a Friday, return the following Sunday. A full week in the Caribbean. I didn't remember booking this. I was certain, absolutely certain, I hadn't booked this. I opened my email. My inbox was normal, routine, the architecture of my life in sorted folders and carefully applied labels. But when I clicked on the Recent Activity tab in my Google account, the timestamp showed that someone had changed my password at 1:38 a.m. The location was flagged as my apartment, which meant either someone had been inside with access to my phone or, and this thought moved through my stomach like water going down into cold depths, someone had already compromised the account before tonight. The recovery email listed was not mine. It was my mother's. The realization didn't come with shock. Not yet. It came with a kind of crystalline clarity that I recognized from work. The same clarity that emerged when I spotted statistical anomalies in transaction patterns, when something that should have been random revealed itself as deliberate. I went to the recovery email settings and saw it had been added 4 years ago. I had never added it. I had never given permission. My phone buzzed. Text message from Mom. Thank you for gifting the family this trip. I knew I could count on you. I stared at the message for longer than the words required. The timestamp said 2:14 a.m. So she'd been awake. She'd been watching the charges go through. She'd seen them post and had immediately messaged me. Not to confess, not to explain, but to frame it as something I had offered. A gift. An act of love disguised as financial responsibility. I set the phone down and walked to my kitchen. Madison, Wisconsin in January looks like watercolor left in the rain, all pale greens and grays. My apartment faced east, and the sky was beginning that slow transition from black to the purple blue that comes before dawn. I made coffee because I needed the ritual more than the caffeine, and I stood by the window and drank it black while my mind sorted itself into compartments. The visible theft was recent. The breach of access was not. Years meant deliberate. Years meant this was not a moment of desperation, but a system, a framework. I called the fraud department at 6:30 a.m. when I knew they opened. I was calm. This is what I did for work. I assessed risk. I documented evidence. I spoke to people without inflection. I reported a fraudulent charge. I explained that the charges had been made by a family member using access to my account. I answered their questions about whether I authorized the charges, whether I knew the person, whether I wanted to press charges. I said yes to all of it except the authorization. You'll need to file a police report, the bank representative said. Because it involves a family member and a dollar amount over $10,000, we have to report this ourselves as well, but you'll need a case number on your end. Once you have that, we can fully lock down your accounts and begin the reversal process. I wrote down the case number for the police department. My hands were steady. After I hung up, I spent the next 2 hours changing every password I had, checking every account, reviewing months of activity. This is when the pattern revealed itself. Test charges going back 6 months. Small amounts, $20 or $30, probably to see if I noticed. Incremental increases. Monthly charges to a wellness subscription I'd never purchased. A family phone plan that didn't exist. Hundreds of dollars here, a few hundred there. Small enough that I might not notice if I wasn't looking, which I hadn't been. Not because I was negligent, but because I had trusted. Because my mother had always had access to my financial information, had always helped with my taxes when I visited home. Had always been the kind of mother who made it clear that being your parent meant having certain rights. But rights are different from theft. Knowing the difference is what I did for work. I filed the police report that afternoon. I sat in a beige room that smelled like coffee and industrial cleaning solution and explained, again calmly, that my mother and father had access to my account information and had used it to make unauthorized charges. The officer, a woman named Ramirez who looked like she'd been doing this job for long enough to have no remaining capacity for surprise, wrote everything down. She explained that identity theft by a family member was still identity theft, that the amount qualified for felony charges, that I needed to decide if I wanted to press charges or let the bank handle it administratively. I need to think about that, I said, which was true. I did need to think about it, but I also already knew what I would do. That night, my father showed up at my apartment. I'd been expecting this, which is why I'd made the decision about the recording. In Wisconsin, it's legal to record a conversation if one party consents, and I consented to myself, which meant I could record my father without his knowledge. This is the kind of thing you learn when you work in compliance. What's legal, what's defensible, what leaves a mark. He didn't knock. He used his old key, the one I hadn't asked him to return because I was conflict avoidant. Because asking felt like criticism. Because part of me had believed that parents should retain access to their children's homes as some kind of earned privilege. He walked in while I was sitting on my couch reading the policy documents for the police report. "What the hell did you do?" he said. His voice filled the apartment like water, and I noticed how my body responded to it even now, even knowing what I knew. A tightening across my shoulders. A small reduction in how much air my lungs seemed willing to accept. He was a large man, Thomas Mercer, and he'd learned early that size and volume could substitute for argument. "I filed a fraud report," I said. I kept my voice steady. My phone was recording from the side table. "You and Mom stole from me." "We didn't steal anything." He was moving through my living room with the kind of aggressive ease that suggested he felt he had the right to be there, to move through my space as though it were an extension of his own territory. "We're your parents. Family money is family money." "That's not how that works," I said. I stood up because sitting felt submissive, and I needed not to be submissive. "You didn't ask. You didn't have permission. You added yourself as a recovery email to my accounts. You changed my passwords. That's not family money. That's theft. You're going to destroy this family over $12,000? His face was reddening, the veins at his temples beginning to prominence. "Do you know what that kind of accusation does? Do you know what people say when they find out you've reported your own parents to the police?" "I know exactly what they'll say," I said. "And I know that's why you're here. Not because you're concerned about the family, but because you're concerned about the narrative, about people finding out." He moved toward me then, just one step, but it was a step that changed the temperature of the room. I held my position. I'd learned years ago not to flinch, that flinching only encouraged him. But I also felt something shift inside me, something that had perhaps been shifting for years, and was only now reaching its completion. A clarity about what I was willing to endure in order to maintain the fiction of family harmony. "The thing is," I said, and my voice was still calm, which seemed to infuriate him more than anger would have. "I have documentation. I have the bank statements. I have the fraud report with a case number. And I have this conversation which I'm recording." I gestured to my phone. "You can leave now or you can keep talking. But either way, I'm pressing charges." He stared at me. The redness in his face seemed to intensify, seemed almost to vibrate with the effort of containing whatever response was building inside him. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "Your mother is also not welcome here," I said. "Neither of you. And if you try to contact me again, I'm getting a restraining order." He left. Just turned and left. And I heard the door slam hard enough that my windows rattled in their frames. I waited for the fear to come, or the doubt, or any of the emotions that I'd been told should follow a confrontation like this. Instead, I felt a strange kind of lightness, as though I'd been carrying something I hadn't known I was holding, and I'd finally set it down. I texted my brother Lucas that night. He called me within minutes, his voice rough, and I realized he'd been waiting for this, had known something like this would eventually have to happen. "They did it to me too," he said. "I thought I was going crazy. I thought maybe I'd borrowed money and forgot. My credit score is destroyed, Hannah. I have debt in my name that I never took on." The pattern became clear over the next few weeks as I contacted other family members, as I pulled together documentation, as I learned that my parents had used their access to extended families' accounts as well. My cousin Rowan had charges for a furniture purchase she'd never made. My Aunt Elaine had discovered a line of credit opened in her name. None of us had known about the others. That was the true genius of it. The isolation, the shame, the way each of us had initially blamed ourselves. But it was also the thing that ultimately exposed them. We held a family meeting at Aunt Elaine's house 6 weeks after I found those first charges. Elaine had taken charge of organizing it, which meant it was organized with military precision. She'd contacted everyone, explained the purpose, made clear that this was not optional. My parents were there, along with Lucas, Rowan, and Uncle David. My mother had attempted to stage the meeting in her favor. She'd worn a dress that was slightly too fancy, had done her hair, had the appearance of someone preparing for a performance. "Before we begin," I said, and I'd prepared this opening, had rehearsed it in my apartment the night before. "I want everyone to know that I have documentation. Bank statements, police reports, legal documentation of fraud. I have a recording of a conversation with my father, and I'm going to go through it methodically, because I want everyone to understand the scope of what happened." I presented the evidence the way I would have presented a financial analysis at work. Clear, unemotional, organized. I showed the timeline. I showed the test charges, the escalating amounts, the false subscriptions. I showed the recovery email that had been added to my account without my knowledge. I explained the legal implications, the fact that what had been done constituted felony identity theft. My mother began crying before I finished. Real tears, or tears that looked real. I'd learned that she was very good at the performance of tears. "I was trying to help," she said. "You have so much money, and we needed—" "You needed to ask," I said. "If you needed help, you needed to ask. Instead, you stole." "That's an ugly word," my father said, and his voice had that warning tone in it, the one that meant I was supposed to recalibrate, to soften, to perform remorse for having named the thing accurately. I didn't soften. It's the accurate word. One by one, the other family members began to speak. Lucas explained what had happened to his credit. Rowan, who'd initially been angry at me for creating drama, realized that she'd been angry at the wrong person entirely. Aunt Elaine, who'd always been the one holding the family together, looked at my parents with a kind of disappointment that seemed worse than anger. "I need you both to understand," she said, and her voice was quiet in a way that made everyone listen, "that what you did was not a family problem. It was a crime. Hannah is right to have reported it. The rest of you are right to be angry, and I won't be participating in any narrative that treats this as something to be forgiven and move past." My mother left the room, just got up and walked out, which was her way when she couldn't control the narrative. If she couldn't be the victim, if she couldn't make us into the perpetrators, she would remove herself and let her absence be an accusation. My father stayed, but he didn't speak again. He just sat there, present but defeated. And that might have been the most profound moment of all. The moment when his size and volume were revealed to be exactly that, and nothing more. I didn't celebrate that evening. I went home to my apartment, and I sat in the dark, and I felt the weight of what had happened. Not regret. I didn't feel regret. But something complicated. Something that felt like relief mixed with profound sadness. The sadness of having to choose between your family and yourself, and then discovering that your family had already made that choice for you. 3 weeks later, my parents showed up at my office. I was in a meeting when security called up to let me know there were people in the lobby asking for me. I know what I could have done. Sent security to turn them away, stayed in my office, pretended to be unavailable. Instead, I excused myself and went downstairs. My mother looked smaller than I remembered her being. My father looked angry, which was more familiar. We stood in the lobby of the building where I worked, in the professional space where I'd built a reputation for calm competence, and my mother tried to undo everything I'd done. "We're your parents," she said. "You're destroying us. The bank has initiated proceedings. We're going to lose the house. Is that what you wanted?" "I didn't want anything," I said. "I reported the theft. They're responding to the theft." "You could tell them to drop it. You could tell the police you were mistaken. You could still fix this." "No," I said, "I can't, and I won't." My father's face was getting that red color again. "You're selfish. You've always been selfish. You have everything, and you couldn't even give your family." "I need you to leave," I said. My voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it now. Something hard. "I need you to leave my office, and I need you to stop contacting me. If you don't, I'm getting a restraining order." "We're your parents," my mother said again, and she was crying now. The tears real or performed with such mastery that the distinction no longer mattered. "How can you do this to us?" "You did it," I said. "To me, to Lucas, to Aunt Elaine, to all of us. I didn't create this situation. I just named it." I turned and walked back to the elevator. I didn't look back. I didn't acknowledge their calls after me. I went back to my office and I closed the door and I sat at my desk and I let myself feel something. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something more like exhaustion mixed with a strange kind of peace. The legal proceedings took months. The bank pursued restitution. Civil suits were filed. My parents' credit collapsed. The house that had always been held up as the physical manifestation of their success began the process of being sold. I didn't follow the details closely. I didn't need to. I knew how this story ended because I'd documented every step. What surprised me was how I felt. Not vindicated exactly, though there was some element of that. Mostly I felt unburdened. It was as though I'd been carrying something my entire life, an obligation, a kind of emotional debt to people who'd given me life but had never learned the difference between love and possession. And now I didn't have to carry it anymore. I started attending a support group for people who'd experienced financial abuse. It was held in the basement of a library in Madison on Thursday nights. And there were usually about 15 of us. People from all backgrounds who'd made the discovery that the people who were supposed to protect them had instead preyed on them. We didn't talk much about revenge or anger. We talked about boundaries, about the language of no, about the difference between loyalty and self-preservation. I helped Lucas rebuild his credit. It took years, but we did it methodically, the way I approached everything, with patience and documentation and a refusal to accept anything except complete restoration. We met for coffee every 2 weeks, and I'd bring spreadsheets of his accounts, and we'd work through them together. He eventually became a financial advisor himself, specializing in helping people recover from fraud and financial abuse, which felt like the perfect use of his pain. I started leading financial literacy workshops. I did this through my church at first, and then through the library, and eventually through a nonprofit organization that focused on financial education for women. I never mentioned my parents specifically. I didn't need to. The workshops were about teaching people to understand their own financial systems, to recognize early warning signs, to understand that financial security was an expression of self-care. My mother tried to contact me once more, about a year after the initial theft was discovered. She sent me a letter, handwritten, which was designed to seem more personal, more genuine. She'd written about how she'd been wrong, about how she'd been in a bad place, about how she'd hoped we could work toward forgiveness. She didn't apologize. Not really. She wrote around the apology, performed the shape of remorse without the substance. I read it once, and then I put it in a folder, and I didn't respond. I'd learned that some silences are more powerful than any words I could have written. By the following January, the house had sold, my parents had declared bankruptcy, and my own finances were restored. I had a credit score in the high 700s. My accounts were secure. I'd hired a lawyer to draft a cease and desist letter that made clear any further contact would result in legal action. I'd changed the locks on my apartment, not out of fear, but out of principle. This was my space, and I had the right to control access to it. I stood in my apartment on a winter evening much like the one that had begun this entire sequence, and I felt the difference in my chest, in my shoulders, in the way I breathed. The apartment felt safe. Not just safe from physical threat, but safe in a deeper sense. Safe from manipulation. Safe from the kind of love that tried to take without asking. Safe from the obligation to suffer in silence in order to maintain the fiction of family. This is the thing that people don't tell you about confronting the people you come from. It doesn't make you feel better in the way you'd expect. It doesn't deliver a cathartic moment where everything is suddenly light and simple. Instead, it allows you to stop feeling worse, to stop the slow accumulation of small betrayals, to plant yourself on the ground and say, I will not move further into the darkness on your behalf. I thought often about the phrase my mother had used in that first text message, that I'd gifted the family the trip, as though stealing was somehow transmuted into generosity if you framed it correctly, as though the performance of the thing could replace the reality. And I realized that this was the core of what she'd never understood. That money without consent is not generosity. That love without respect is not love. That family without reciprocal decency is just an obligation disguised as natural law. I built a new family slowly. I had friends from work who became closer friends. I had Aunt Elaine, who'd started a tradition of Sunday dinners at her house that Lucas and I and sometimes Rowan attended. I had the people from my support group who knew exactly what it meant to rebuild trust in your own judgment. I had colleagues and neighbors and the barista at my regular coffee shop who'd started asking how I was doing and seemed to actually care about the answer. The old understanding had been that family is given and therefore unquestionable. The new understanding was that family is maintained, that it's built through respect and reciprocal care, and that sometimes the people you're born to are not the people you're meant to keep. By the 3rd year after the theft, I'd stopped waiting for my parents to change. I'd stopped hoping that they would have some moment of genuine recognition of what they'd done. I'd released that expectation the way you'd release a held breath, and the relief was immense. I didn't hate them. I didn't fantasize about their suffering, though suffering did come, as it had to. I simply existed in a different universe from them, one where their choices and their consequences were their own, where my responsibility began and ended with myself. This is what I would tell you if you asked me what I learned. That clarity is an act of love toward yourself. That boundaries are the architecture of a life that's actually yours. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in the narrative someone else has written for you. That the people who came before you do not own you. That the money you earn is yours to do with as you choose. That saying no to people you love doesn't make you unloving. It makes you sane. I'm 41 now. My apartment is paid for. My retirement accounts are robust. I've funded education for 2 young people who came through my nonprofit workshops and had potential they couldn't afford to develop. I sit on the board of an organization focused on financial security for people experiencing domestic abuse. I have a partner, a woman named Catherine, who I've been with for 5 years, and who has her own complicated family history, and who understands that love is something you choose actively, daily, with intention. I think about my parents occasionally. I wonder if they've stayed solvent. I hope they have, not out of continued obligation, but out of a basic human wish that people not suffer unnecessarily. But I don't carry them anymore. That's the thing that it took me the longest to understand. That I could let go without being cruel. That I could walk away without explanation. That the people who birthed me don't have the right to an endless account of my feelings about them. The theft, in the end, was the best thing that happened to me. That sounds dramatic, and maybe it is. But it's true. It forced me to see what I'd been colliding with, what I'd been making excuses for, what I'd been willing to endure in the name of a family loyalty that was only ever flowing in one direction. And then it forced me to choose myself. Not in a selfish way, but in the way that choosing yourself is actually the only honest foundation for any other relationship. I would not call myself healed. I would call myself clear. And clear is so much better. Clear is the ground you stand on. Clear is the thing that lets you sleep through the night without your nervous system being constantly attuned to threat. Clear is the freedom that nobody tells you about. The freedom that comes not from forgetting what happened to you, but from completely understanding it and deciding it will not define your future. My apartment is quiet on winter nights. I make tea. I read or work on financial literacy curriculum for the nonprofit. I'm planning a trip, because now when I book a trip, it's with my own money and my own intention, and no one is going to use my account information to create an alternate narrative about what I had offered. I fall asleep easily. I wake without dread. I've built a life that's actually mine, and every day that nothing is stolen from it without my permission feels like a small miracle, a small victory, a small proof that clarity is stronger than manipulation, and that boundaries, it turns out, are the most powerful thing you can offer yourself.